Good day, my name is Helena van der Merwe. I work as a high school music teacher in Somerset West, South Africa, and my talk today is from violin to viola, when, how and why. My talk is mainly aimed at high school music students who play violin and who are curious to maybe play the viola, learn more about the viola. So why the viola? Well, I believe certain people are drawn to certain instruments, and mainly because of the sound of that instrument. So where one person might want to learn clarinet or saxophone or flute, another might want to learn the trumpet or the violin or the cello. So you will go for the instrument that you like the sound. I always tell my students you want to like the sound that you're making when you practice. You want to enjoy practicing. So the viola has a more melancholy sound than the violin. It is not as well known. It does not have the virtuosic qualities of the violin. The violin, because of its range, can ring out above the lower instruments, where the viola, the range is more in the middle of the orchestra, middle of the sound range, but it's more melancholy. It has a completely different character. So for me, that was always very appealing. I loved the viola since I learned it for the first time. As soon as I started playing viola, I immediately asked my teacher to change from violin to viola. I just loved it. So it is not as well known, but I found that as a music teacher, it is important to expose violin students to the viola. Many of them have never seen it or never heard it. Maybe they've heard a recording, but have never seen it in front of their eyes. So it's good to expose them to the instrument. And I find very often the students who ask about the instrument, who say, can I also learn? Can I maybe try it out? They are very often the students who end up learning the viola in addition to violin or change to viola altogether. The viola has a completely different characteristic and a different sound quality which appeals to certain people. So when is a good time to start? Well, in my studies and in my reading, I found that most teachers agree that it is a good idea to start on violin. The violin, when you look at alignment, it's where the arm would naturally go. If I swing my arm and I stop there in the natural position, that is where my violin would go. It's a very natural way to hold, where I place my fingers. I don't have to work too hard. It is where the hand falls naturally and where the fingers fall naturally. The viola is quite a bit bigger. If I hold the two instruments together, you can see that the viola is quite a bit bigger than the violin. Where the violin is standard size is about 14 inches, the viola can be anything between 15.5 to 18 inches. So it's much bigger. So when I look at alignment, when I hold my instrument, my arm would have to extend more, which is almost a bit more uncomfortable and more straining on the muscles. Also, if I look at my right arm, my bow arm, where my arm would fall naturally is where it would be on the violin. But for the viola, I need to extend everything, which is a bit more unnatural and almost straining on the muscles. You have to work much harder. So it's a good idea to start on the violin just because it's a more natural hold. And another advantage for me is that the violin reads treble clef. So for many young students, they've already played piano or maybe recorder, and when they start playing the violin, the treble clef is already familiar to them. So they learn to read their notes in the treble clef. They learn the basic technique of holding the instrument, playing on the fingertips, the correct bow position for the hand. And those things are all the same when you go to the viola. The basic position of the hand, the basic position of the bow hand will be the same. So I find it's a good idea for a little bit older student to start learning the viola, maybe late in primary school or early in high school. And then when they start playing the viola, then to make that adjustment to the bigger instrument. I remember when I started viola, changing from violin, my elbow used to get a bit sore in the beginning as I got used to playing on the bigger instrument. And of course, the main thing that is a big adjustment is the finger spacing, the placement of the fingers. On the neck of the violin, you can put two fingers directly next to each other for a semitone, but maybe on the viola, especially if you have thin fingers, you might have to leave a little bit of space in between the fingers. So intonation can be quite challenging. It's very important when you play viola and practice viola that you really listen to intonation, work on intonation, use the open strings to check your third finger. Also, when you start shifting to third position, that you use the open strings to help learn and train those muscles to play accurately and have good intonation on the viola. Also, playing in higher positions can be quite challenging when I have to go around the instrument. It can be quite challenging, especially for students with smaller hands. So playing in the high positions, the scales or pieces, it can be quite challenging. But of course, practice makes perfect. The more you do it, the better you get. But it can be quite straining on the muscles. And I advise my students when they get tired to just take a break, shake at the arm, maybe do something else for half an hour, and then continue practicing. The other thing is the right hand, the bow hand. So the violin and the cello, more or less in the middle of the cello and the violin range, you would find the viola range. But the size of the instrument is not in the middle between the violin and the cello. So it's got a relatively small sound box for the range of the instrument. And the strings are quite thick, so you really have to work hard with your bow hand to produce a good sound. Again, the violin alignment would be more natural, where your arm would fall naturally. For the viola, you need to extend the arm a bit more and really work hard, especially on your C string and your D string. If you only press lightly, the sound will not have a good quality. I really have to work hard and add a lot of weight through the arm, through the hand, to produce that good C string sonority that you want. You really want it to resonate, almost thinking of a cello, where you've got the big fat sound. So you really have to work much harder with the bow arm on the viola than on the violin. So those are all adjustments that you have to make. So it's a good idea not just to think of the viola as a big violin, but of an instrument in its own right, with its own technical challenges and own technical demands that you have to work on. And make that adjustment. Really work hard with your bow hand. Listen carefully to intonation and things like that. Then, of course, the other thing is learning the alto clef, reading the alto clef. So a lot has been written about it. A lot has been said. There are different ways to do it. I found for me, I teach the students where the open strings are to read the open strings. And of course, beginner books are quite useful in that regard to learn where the open strings are written on the viola. And then I also heard a talk where the one person said it's a good idea to maybe use the Suzuki books. Suzuki book 1, 2, and 3 for the violin and the viola use the same pieces. But for the viola, it's written a fifth lower in the alto clef. So maybe for the student who already knows the violin pieces of the Suzuki books, if they start reading the alto clef, the brain sort of makes the connection where the notes are now on the alto clef. So those are all tools you can use to learn to read the alto clef. I personally have not used the Suzuki books. I have some other beginner books that I find useful, but I always start with the open strings, knowing where your open strings are, and then work your way from there. And then my last comments is try to play as much viola repertoire as possible and not just transcriptions of violin pieces. A viola piece is written for viola to showcase the qualities of the viola and the sonority and the resonance of that instrument. Violin pieces are written for violin to showcase the different qualities of the violin. And what works for the violin does not necessarily work for the viola. So I know, especially for lower grade pieces, there are a lot of transcriptions, but choose them wisely. When you get to more advanced repertoire, grade 5, 6, 7 exam levels, try not to play transcriptions, but viola repertoire, which is written to showcase the wonderful qualities of the viola. And for the rest, playing in the orchestra, it is a wonderful thing to be part of the viola section where you are right in the heart of the orchestra. You sit with the violins on your right and the cellos and bass on your left and all the winds from the back. You're right in the middle of the orchestra. I've always loved playing viola in the orchestra where you are really surrounded by everything. And where a lot of the time the melody might be in the violins or in the woodwinds, you get these wonderful harmonies and the color of the viola and the second violins woven into the music. I've always loved the viola in orchestra and being right in the heart of everything. So I want to encourage you to learn this wonderful instrument. If you've never considered it, ask your teacher if he or her can teach viola, or maybe find out in your area if there's a viola teacher, and learn this wonderful instrument. It's great to play, and it's got wonderful repertoire, and I hope it brings you as much joy as it has me. Thank you.